Hello folks, just imagine for a moment you've got no idea what Wuchang is, or maybe you actually don't, and you stumble across it on Steam and see this right here. Most people would click on this and then scroll through to see what the general consensus is, and if this is a bad game with a bad score, or a good game with a disgruntled player base, at which point you would be completely forgiven for still being none the wiser. Scrolling through here is a little bit of a roller coaster to say the least, and it's hard to formulate a decision based on so many different opinions, ranging from the game running very poorly to the game running great, all the way to the game design, combat, and overall execution being garbage, whilst other players state it's some of the best they've ever seen. The Metacritic reviews aren't much better. It's the same confusing blend of complete opposite views, likely leading to many potential players not being able to make a decision. And so we're here today to answer the question, is Wuchang a good game? Now, to immediately address the low-resolution elephant in the room, Wuchang 100% has issues with its performance. To show you exactly what I mean, I have some footage from my Xbox Series X right here, and we're going to go through some of the different settings to show just how bad things can get. So we've got no HDR on this TV, but that focuses mostly on higher resolutions and stronger colors, lights, shadows, etc. But as for the performance mode, we have FPS, performance, or balanced. I have to play on FPS. Anything outside of this and the game is very, very stuttery, as you can see, and balanced is almost just as bad. The same applies for locking the FPS too. If I don't lock this, then it's almost just as bad as performance mode. Motion blur is honestly one of the worst I've ever seen, and playing with it on will quickly give you a headache. And honestly, I haven't noticed much with the depth of field options, so I just keep it off as it feels like it runs slightly better. So as you can see, as bad as the performance can be, with the correct settings, it really isn't all that bad. We will touch on this again a little bit later on, but I started gaming in the Nintendo 64 and Game Boy era of games, so graphics to a very large extent do not bother me as much as they might the average gamer. Now, in addition to all of this, the resolution of certain environmental objects is below poor, and no manner of adjusting these settings will fix this for console. It's not immediately noticeable as you're constantly moving along. However, if you stop for even a moment within this game and begin to take in the immediate scenery, then it is quickly spoiled by the low resolution. Now, I don't have HDR active with this TV, but I also don't have HDR active with any games I play on this TV either, and I can say that it isn't often I see so many poorly rendered objects within any new games that I play. Character models, enemies, attack animations, and various other objects seem to be unaffected by this, but the vast amount of environmental objects are. I can live with it, but I appreciate how it could add to an already bad experience for some players. As far as PC performance is concerned, it really comes down to your own PC specs and whether or not your particular PC can run the game well. It's definitely more demanding than typical games would be, so gamers who can run games of equal requirements may find that Wuchang does not run well, despite the fact that it should. The game has received a handful of patches since its launch, and these have addressed various issues in performance and optimization, mainly for PC and PlayStation 5, but all platforms have been addressed. Both console and PC players have reported that the recent patches have fixed various different issues, but things are still far from perfect. The footage I've just shown you was recorded this morning, so you can see there's still quite some work to go. The game isn't out of the woods yet, and I doubt it will be for a little while, but to answer the question on Wuchang's performance, I would say if you're playing on console, then once fiddling with the settings in-game, and possibly even your own TV, you shouldn't really have any issues at all. But I haven't played on PlayStation 5, and I've heard a range of different feedback regarding players either having big issues or no issues at all, so I don't know what to make of that. However, PC players should be cautious, as it's entirely possible that the game just may not run very well for you, despite it running great for others. So the question on performance can be answered on mostly a case-by-case basis, with console players having a little bit more comfort in the knowledge that it should, for all intents and purposes, be running relatively well. Now, that brings us to the topic of actual gameplay and whether or not Wuchang succeeds in being a good Souls-like game, or even just a good game in general. So, taking performance out of the equation altogether, to look at Wuchang's overall gameplay, the combat is fast-paced and centers mostly around dodging, allowing you to lean into other mechanics like various different versions of parrying, if you would like to, but unlike Sekiro or some other games, these are not a requirement, and I think that freedom is very nice. The combat is responsive and fluid, although it has some nuances that will take some getting used to. I found that it mostly ends up being an easier challenge than the harder Souls-like games out there once you've begun to understand exactly how the combat works. There appears to be a ton of depth to the builds, with all weapons having unique skills, and with how many different disciplines are available for each 5 weapon types. There's also benedictions for weapons, 4 spell slots and over 40 spells, 3 accessory slots, and a weapon imbuement mechanic with a range of options, ultimately all culminating into quite a solid playground for any Souls-like fan. Add in the female protagonist, skimpy outfits, and subtle but very much there jiggle physics, and you've got yourself what looks to be, for all intents and purposes, a very promising Souls-like game. To add level design into the equation, I'll come right out and say that this is probably the best level design I've seen in a very long time. The last time I loved the game's level design as much as this was when Sekiro released, and the only time prior to that would be Dark Souls 1 and 2. If your only experiences are with the likes of Elden Ring, Lies of P, Kazan, etc., then it's likely that you won't be too familiar with the concept of repeatedly getting lost and then opening shortcuts back to familiar territory, or having to run a whole 2 minutes through enemies back to the boss arena every time you fail on that boss. So I appreciate if players are not big on this design due to being unfamiliar and originally gaining their love for the genre on different terms, but for me personally, this has felt like a love letter to the old style of level design that my love for the genre was originally built upon, and unlike the messy approach that Lords of Fallen took towards level design, or the vast approach that Elden Ring took towards making the entire game open world, Wuchang honestly blows the competition out of the water as far as level design is concerned. There are multiple branching paths at all times. You will miss paths and or forget about them. You will discover doorways but won't find their key until hours later on. Other shortcuts you'll unlock and realise you're close to familiar territory again, and at times you can skip or unknowingly miss entire sections of the game. I feel all of these elements are what helped form the Souls-like community in the first place. Back in Dark Souls 1, soapstones were this new and intuitive way of players banding together and sharing knowledge they've acquired through their own trial and error. When games are devoid of the elements that give room for exploration, trial and error, etc., then I feel some of the original charm that made the genre has ultimately been lost. So I'm glad to say that very much is not the case here. There is an absolute wealth of knowledge to be unlocked and shared about Wuchang's level design. There's tons of secrets, shortcuts, skips, and fast tracks hidden throughout the entire game, and I'm sure the New Game Plus experience will feel more rewarding because of this once you take all of that first playthrough knowledge into the second. Now, it wouldn't be fair to not point out Wuchang's biggest issues. We've covered performance already, but in terms of actual gameplay, there are some mechanics and features here and there that may not be for everyone, or that some players may think are poorly designed. Such as the animation time on healing does feel dreadfully slow. Unlike other Souls-likes, you aren't given many chances or much room to heal within certain fights. This lady right here being a prime example of needing to time your healing like you would any other dodge or parry within the game. If you are not very precise, then it's very likely you will get hit whilst healing. I honestly don't know what to make of it. The more time I've spent with this, the better I've gotten at choosing my moments, but it does feel like it's slightly too difficult to heal back up at times, as sometimes you will dodge the enemy's combo and then think it's safe to heal again, but they may just very well start another combo mid-healing animation. I've obviously healed tens of thousands of times within Souls-like games at this point, and this definitely goes down as being one of the hardest to do so in, mostly just in the boss fights. In addition to this, being knocked down within Wuchang can feel like the end. Unlike most of the Souls-likes, you can't just spam the dodge button to immediately get back up. Instead, there's a brief moment of inability, and then the game will let you react. However, oftentimes the enemy will be throwing out a follow-up attack to hit you whilst you're down, and spam dodging will likely cause you to be hit by this. The correct recovery process is to actually remain on the floor and watch for the enemy's attack, and then once it is about to land, you simply just press the dodge button once to not only get up, but also dodge the enemy's attack. Dodge too early and it's likely you will get up just before the attack lands, and since you've already dodged, you won't be able to dodge again in time to evade the attack. I think this can be jarring for a lot of players and add to an already frustrating fight, so it's likely that it's being misunderstood and looked at as a core flaw within the game, as opposed to the reaction-based mechanic that it is. There are some other flaws here and there, such as the toolbar only having 4 available slots, and 3 of those get taken up by what you'd consider mandatory items, giving most players only 1 additional item slot for the utility-based items, despite there being a vast amount to use. This absolutely could do with being increased, up to maybe at least 6. The inner demon mechanic is also a little bit hit and miss for some players, some finding it frustrating and others finding it a welcome addition. I personally quite like it. Dark Souls 1 had hollowing, and other Souls-like games feature similar mechanics that I do feel belong within the genre. The demon itself creates moments where the stakes are raised, but not to any real detriment to yourself, and it feels rewarding to defeat them and wipe your demon gauge clean. The demon gauge itself is also quite a solid addition in my opinion. I found myself with this maxed out quite often, as I'm very comfortable with Souls-like games. However, less experienced players can manage this and keep it at a lower threshold, making their overall experience slightly easier. It's a subtle way to allow players to slightly adjust the difficulty, whilst also tying it in to the actual game itself. Honestly, most of the negatives regarding the game all fall within the same theme of being misunderstood or a little bit hit and miss, but there's nothing here that completely ruins the experience or changes the core concept of a Souls-like so much that it would be hard to find familiar ground. So, is Wuchang a good game? Without the performance issues, yeah, it absolutely is. I'd put it right up there with the likes of Lies of P and Kazan in terms of holding its own against an actual FromSoft title. Kazan is some of the best combat and boss design I've ever seen, whilst other areas of the game, such as level design, are lacking, and Lies of P has a very engaging world and story, with much slower but still rewarding combat. Wuchang comes in with very solid combat that doesn't quite outperform Kazan's, but its level design absolutely does, whilst its world and story doesn't outdo Lies of P, but it definitely has a lot more going for its combat than Lies of P does, especially before Overture and its additional weapons were released. It does level design better than either of those two games, and even better than Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne in my opinion, whilst its combat, world, story, and overall art design are all pretty solid across the board too. Apart from the performance and optimization issues, I'd be wrong to call it anything other than a good game. I mean, I'm simply comparing it to its peers here, and it is absolutely holding up. So yes, Wuchang is a good game. If you like Souls-likes, then it's likely you will like this. If you especially like the older level design of Dark Souls 1 and 2, then you'll definitely be in your element here. It does have some nuance to the mechanics, and combat can make it feel like a tougher game than it actually is, but I feel like it will just take slightly longer for most players to pick up on the combat, and once they do, it actually becomes slightly easier than most of the Souls-likes, at least in my opinion anyway. So my final verdict on Wuchang is that she is a good and solid Souls-like game, standing strong with the likes of Kazan and Lies of P in terms of overall execution. However, she is ultimately let down by her performance and optimization issues, which simply cannot be overlooked, leaving her in this strange space where she deserves tons of praise and hype for the execution, but the poor performance and negative feedback have ultimately stained what otherwise could have been a fantastic launch. Anyway, that would be it for this one, folks. I do, of course, have a range of guides and news videos on the channel already, so do feel free to stop on by and check things out. But otherwise, thanks for watching, folks, and until next time, peace.